This radio show is sponsored by redhorizon.com. Go to redhorizon.com to get a free Urbit Planet and join the Urbit Network.
Welcome to Urbit Radio, your premier frequency for decentralized computing, where we explore innovative ideas, applications, and engage with the brilliant minds who are shaping this unique platform. The date is April 13th, 2024. The floor price of an Urbit star is approximately $1,600 US. With your hosts, Gary and Ryan, aka Tiller Tobus and Master Malwow. Today is a special episode of Urbit Radio because joining us we have Will Hanlon, aka migrev-dolseg, aka winner of the 2023 Assembly Hackathon for his application EYAS. Spelt EYAS, which is a browser-based text editor for Urbit. It allows you to easily edit files and run code on your ship from anywhere, including a mobile device. Will has also created the Feeds application, which allows you to subscribe to blogs, podcasts, various RSS channels from
including
your
the show.
Some listeners may be using it to listen to this very episode. Both of these apps can be installed from Will's distribution moon, which is distr migrev-dolseg, which we will also include in the show notes. Will is employed by Red Horizon and is a member of its slightly secretive Aegean project, which I'm sure we'll find our way into today. Will, welcome to Urbit Radio.
Thank you for having me, guys. Yeah, that was a great intro. I'm honored to be here and excited to talk to you guys.
I do want to mention, I don't think Aegean should be considered that secret of a project. It's just hard to communicate. We try to communicate it.
Incidental.
We'll probably try to do something about that in this show. I mean, this is a great opportunity to talk about what we're doing.
So both of you work on Aegean, and Aegean is under Red Horizon. Red Horizon is doing a lot of different things.
It's under the Urbit Foundation, actually. Red Horizon is a participant.
Oh, that's true. Yes, that's true. Yes, it is a collaborative effort between Red Horizon, the UF, and Tlon.
Mm-hmm. So the members of the Aegean team include 4 employees of the Urbit Foundation, and a couple other Urbit Foundation employees participate. And then there are 2 effectively part-time, in some ways it's full-time. It's a difficult distinction to make, but effectively me and Will are also, fully engaged in, professional capacity in the Aegean project. And we also have some, I would say, guests in the project from Tlon and Native Planet and other organizations who participate mostly in observer roles, but also as advisors, effectively.
It's been cool to see the teams come together between Red Horizon and the Urbit Labs team. And it's been the first time that I've really worked on a Urbit project that was more than just me in my bedroom coding on apps by myself. So definitely learned a lot from that.
Will, is this what you were hired by Red Horizon to work on?
Not originally, no. I wasn't hired as a hooner necessarily. I was hired to do Earth-side web development to provide the interface that you see when you log into redhorizon.com. And then have slowly finagled my way out of that and into hooning, which is what I was after all along.
Yeah, we kind of understood after a while of working with Will that he's kind of a cracked hooner. I think at the beginning we only thought he was just like a normal Hoon School graduate. Oh, it's a good thing that he knows Hoon. Yeah, it's a value add. He's actually one of the best, in my opinion. He's certainly one of the more influential. I don't think anybody could deny that at this point.
I actually don't yet think of myself as a very good hooner. I think I'm good at writing Sail because I understand how the browser works better than most Hoon engineers. But in terms of my actual hooning capability, I think I write in kind of an ugly and idiosyncratic way, just due to the fact that I haven't spent much time reading other developers' code as much as I should have. So for a while, I was implementing patterns that in retrospect look like completely insane things to be doing inside of Hoon just because I didn't really know better. But when you're using the application, you wouldn't necessarily know because it has a nice interface with CSS in it. But yeah, I've gotten better a lot over the last 6 months.
You're a fan of this programming pattern, especially that I think only works if you're doing your UI in Sail, but you put the entire application in one file. So, for context, there are typically 4 places where you put Hoon files in an Urbit app. You have your app file, which tells you about the protocol, your lib file, which is where your kind of toolkit comes from, your SIR file, which is where your types come from, and your MAR file, which is where your type conversions come from, or your mark conversions, how your portable data works. And at the very least, if you want to try to combine them, Hoon is pretty flexible in that way, but in the standard way, which I don't really know if it should be the standard way. Maybe we could talk about that as we go into it. But in the standard way that people build Urbit applications, at the very least, you need to build out your marks because you need to explain how your data is going to be transferred to and from Urbit over the web. You need to write, effectively, it's usually JSON conversions that end up going in this separate directory. But yeah, in this Urbit native UI style, you can do all of that stuff in line. And yeah, you get these very aesthetically elegant programs that, well, not everybody's text editing environment is super convenient for everything being located in one file. You do kind of get like the big picture of what the application looks more elegant because you could just see the logical progression from your primitive types to your protocol as the file progresses, which is I believe how one would approach reading the feeds application. I'm not sure about IS. I haven't looked very deeply at the code there.
Yeah, so the whole put everything in one file strategy, you're right, is partly born out of the fact that I don't use marks that much because I'm not doing a lot of JSON encoding. I'm doing barely any at all. But it's also partly born out of the fact that I really wanted to do development inside of this app that I made called IS. And IS, it's still very much a prototype. It doesn't have support for opening multiple files at the same time. So if you want to open multiple files at the same time, you have to have a different browser tab, which is what I would do in my development flow. But it has this interesting way of letting you automatically collapse indented sections of code. And there's like a little convention that I built in there for specifying which blocks of code should start out as folded when you first open a file. And what this lets you do is organize your Hoon code in a way that kind of makes it zoomable. So you can start out and open this file, and then you have almost like chapters in the UI that you can expand and collapse that let you see your code at different levels of abstraction. So most commonly, you're just folding arms in a core, or you can even do inline documentation style stuff where you have your comments built into these indented regions that start out as closed. And I really liked that pattern because I think from a development experience, it's really nice to be able to view your program at those different levels. And, it worked for me. I don't necessarily make any claim that this is the best way to be doing things. It's just what I like to do, and I didn't care if other people adopted it or not. I don't really care.
I think you should. I mean, I think it is objectively a superior way to write code. Maybe there are ways for the IS program to mature, but I mean, clearly it's more native, right? You're writing directly into the system. I recently had a kind of effort to teach somebody who was completely new to computers how to write Hoon. And one of the most difficult concepts to express was like, okay, this person was new to both, the Bash terminal environment and to Urbit. And so it was fairly difficult to explain that, like, no, you can't write Hoon runes into the Bash terminal. These are different environments. There's Earth and then there's Mars. I think it's probably going to be a lot easier to teach people how to write apps for Urbit when they're only writing in the Urbit environment. And that kind of is, eventually the point, right? You don't want to be using outside systems. So a lot of developers who have existing experience, they're going to prefer to have some kind of interoperability with the workflows they're already familiar with. But, we're looking into the future at people learning programming for the first time inside just the Urbit environment. And yeah, it needs to at least be possible to use something like IS and some other things to simply ignore the existence of technology that is not Urbit.
I'm curious what you guys think could be the wins associated with building a Urbit-tailored IDE or an Urbit native IDE. Is this a project that would be a ton of work to more or less replicate the VS Code experience? Or would there be some innovations that we could imbue that would make the development experience far better than what app devs are currently used to?
VS Code is extremely featureful, but not every developer uses all of those features.
So I actually have a lot of thoughts on this. This is a very deep question for me. And I think the answer is yes, obviously, you could make development environments that are Martian native that let you do some astoundingly different things than what you would do in, the normal development flow. And this gets to this idea that I think we're planning on talking about, which is homo interactivity. I kind of stole this idea from looking at programs like Google Sheets, which do this really interesting thing where they couple the data and the interface to that data as often as they possibly can. And that's kind of what homo interactivity is. It's whenever you have something that needs to change, the representation of that data should be its own interface. So if you imagine you're editing some Google Sheet, if you want to change the value, you don't have to, Alt-Tab and go into Emacs and open up some file and find where that data is and then edit it and then go back into the main program to see your edit. It's all within the same interface. And what that lets you do is have development cycles and iteration cycles that don't feel like you're programming, but you are, because you're just modifying your interface. And within programs like Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, millions of people do programming every day, and they don't even know that they're programming because it's so intuitive that the interface and the data are coupled. So when you think about how you turn this concept into something that is Martian native and applies to all of the data on your system, you can imagine that what app development looks like is you're just editing your interface directly, and you're creating these fundamentally tree-shaped things which nest inside of other tree-shaped things, and that tree that you're editing is all of your data. And what homo interactivity gives you is that tree of your data is its own interface. So you can change your tree of data natively in whatever affordances that part of the tree gives you on that data. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me, yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I like it.
I think I'm going to need to see a prototype for it to really sink in.
Well,
that's the danger with talking about these things too early is, lots of big words don't mean anything, but some shiny buttons on a screen go a long way.
I mean, when you talk about the distance between a text editor and an IDE, I mean, I think probably somebody who uses IDEs more than text editors, which I'm not in that class of people, would have maybe more elaborate thoughts on what it means to really be integrated. But to me, if you could just simply, be programming into the system that also renders your programming environment, and have the same system rendering your programming environment also rendering your application, and if you could manage to fit, the output and the input in the same screen, that's what I expect from integration. And so IIS kind of has that. I think to build some classes of applications, you do need to kind of keep track of multiple windows or tabs. But it's certainly going in the right direction towards being fully integrated and just kind of having like a what you see is what you get experience of coding. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to like minute features that developers like, something like being able to search your entire file tree for a string or a regex pattern and do find and replace. Every little feature like that is going to take some work. And so obviously if you have a very large team, you can create in any environment a more featureful application when your features are defined in these like, very discrete UI elements. But at the same time, Vim does not have much trouble attracting an audience. Sometimes a small number of very powerful features is enough if your target audience is willing to learn the system. And so I guess it depends on what you mean by IDE in the end. I think many people will consider an IDE to just be a very, very featureful programming environment, and that's kind of tough to accomplish with a small team. But if you consider an IDE to be something that is integrated, that gives you these kinds of what you see is what you get properties, and that have a smaller number of very powerful features that allow you to be creative with them, I think that is not only something that Urbit can support. I think it's maybe the area of programming where Urbit is potentially the most powerful.
Could the inclusion of a intership Urbit native Git system be the piece that could make the IDE project really worthwhile?
Maybe. I think we kind of already have like Git-ish features. It's more the GitHub-ish features that we're lacking, right? We don't have the ability to like write issues on people's repos and like interact in natural language. And, the community aspect of collaboration is kind of missing. But the ability to copy and fork and merge is at least there in the back end. Certainly a lot of those aspects could be surfaced more to the UI.
I think it's the right long-term move for Urbit to have its own collaborative software editing tools built into it. But it is still kind of a long way away now that I'm actually seeing how much of the infrastructure of it needs to be built.
I actually conceived of homo interactivity a little bit differently than the way you just described it, Will. Like, to me, it goes back to something that I think we've brought up a few times on this show already, where like there's a very real human phenomenon. It's been the subject of many psychological studies where, and I'm sure, you guys and everybody listening will have experienced this, in recent memory, where like, okay, you want to do something, and this is physical world, right? Take away the computers. You want to do something, and the thing you have to do is in another room. So you open the door, you go into that room, and as soon as you walk into the room, you have no memory of what it was you were supposed to be doing. And it has to do with the way the human mind thinks about context, and like your location in space is kind of an underpinning of the things that you're meant to be doing. So when you change your location, all of a sudden you forget what you were supposed to do. And these small interruptions in the feedback cycle of, getting from point A to point B, they add up a lot. And whenever you have to change context in order to accomplish something, it's often conceived of as still a fairly tight feedback loop when you imagine somebody, for example, like, okay, so here in my to-do list is a reference to something that, I'm going to read that reference. I'm just going to write natural language like, okay, I need to do this thing. And then I'm going to remember that means I need to open up Google Chrome and then go to this website in which I do the thing. People conceive of that as being reasonably fast, right? Okay, I'm going to read that. I'm going to remember what I had to do. I'm going to go open up Chrome. I'm going to enter the website. But when you consider the very high likelihood that somewhere along the way of changing all of these contexts, you're going to forget what it was that you had to be doing, or you're going to get distracted. They end up being very, very loose feedback loops. And it can take, I mean, I have seen like real examples of this taking like a task that should take 30 seconds and extending it to something like 15 minutes to half an hour. Just because of the accelerating nature of distraction. Small distractions can just add up to a lot. So I kind of view this homo interactivity idea, at least when it comes to like the development environment, as just this like this effort to make it impossible to need to change context to whatever degree you can. And it goes across other disciplines too. It's not just programming, although I think that's like a very high leverage area for us since we're trying to build out, you know, a collaborative piece of software that other people can contribute to. But yeah, just in general, especially in digital life, where you have a bunch of different systems that are promulgated by megacorps who are trying to claim territory in your mind space by forcing you into their view of something. The actual reality of working with large amounts of digital things is that you have to change contexts all the time. And I think the people who are most skilled at working in the digital world are the people who are best able to change contexts all the time and still keep track of what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And so I think that could just be cleaned up a lot. And I think that's a very deep implication of saying something like there's a need for a unified system, talking about like operating systems and Urbit as an operating system, where, yeah, that is like one of the user experiences that is most harmful about the big ball of mud is the constant need to change contexts and the kind of need to, you know, have some world in which you don't need to do that. It's also, I think, one of the sticking points of people who prefer to do everything in the Linux terminal, people who like to use Emacs for everything. You know, people tend to naturally seek out, like, what is the one environment in which all my stuff lives? And if Urbit is going to tell any story, it should be, you know, this Urbit UI is the environment in which all of your stuff lives. And it doesn't require you to use outside systems to change contexts.
There's this programming principle that I've been shilling for a while now called locality of behavior, which is like this design philosophy that things should be as close together and as far down on the tree as you can possibly manage for that exact reason. So you're not context switching. You don't have to go back up the tree and then into some other forked location to see the data that you need to see or be in the context that you need to be in. And homo interactivity is kind of a special case of that, where the things that you're trying to put close together are the interface and the data. But this locality of behavior thing is an idea that can be applied to, you know, so many aspects of design. And even in everyday life, I think about locality of behavior in like just the supply chain dependency of everyday living. Like, where does my food get grown? I don't want that to be 1,000 miles away. I want to have good locality of behavior with the things that I'm reliant on for my life. And just like from a design perspective, that is what I think is the correct design for these large systems. You want the things that are important to be close together and not need these giant infrastructure systems to abstract over the complexity of how to get things from here to there. Because those systems are what turn into the ball of mud. And once they're there, they're really hard to get rid of.
Right. It's kind of difficult to communicate this metaphor, but it's like, the way I see it, at least, hopefully it's somewhat clear what I'm talking about. But if you want to have like an orange tree in your backyard, it's a big mismatch of intentions to say that like, well, actually the orange tree belongs to Orange Tree Corp. And you need to cross the street or go to a different town where all of the orange trees are. They're still organized by, you know, who owns them. So you can get to your orange tree and it's yours. But yeah, you must leave the context of your home in order to get to Orange Tree Corp and pluck your orange. That kind of absurdity is, I think it happens in the non-digital world, but it's ever present in the digital world as of today.
According to htmx.org, locality of behavior is the principle that the behavior of a unit of code should be as obvious as possible by looking only at that unit of code.
And this is like almost identical to Axiom 0 of shrubbery, which Liam laid out in his some screed in the Neo channel, which is that a shrub or a node in the tree only has knowledge of what is beneath it in the tree. It doesn't assume knowledge about its parents. Its state is beneath it, and that's how you ensure these clean abstractions when you need to solve a problem.
It's also a kind of nice preventative pattern for this kind of Orange Tree Corp style of insanity, where, yeah, if what's relevant to you is, in this outside context, a cousin node in shrubbery language, then you probably have made a mistake in your design somewhere. You should try to figure out a circumstance in which your expected behavior becomes local. So I didn't actually realize when you, Will, and I think others now have become very passionate about this HTMX inside of Hoon pattern of designing UIs, that this all kind of came from one developer who was kind of silently working on it. Not too silently. I think he did tweet about it. But yeah, this guy, Sivril Litsub, wrote this library called Mast, which is what enables everything that we're doing here. It's a dependency of IS and of feeds.
No, it's not actually.
It's not.
No, HTMX is written by some guy who's not Urbit related at all.
No, but the Mast project, I thought, was what people were using in order to make Sail compatible with HTMX.
No, HTMX is just attributes that you put on your Manxes. Mast, I'm not sure if, I know there's a chess app that uses Mast, and it's very similar in that you're doing swaps at arbitrary spots in the tree, but it's not using HTMX at all. It's just a similar idea. And the neat thing about Mast is that it works based on server sent events. So it's a little bit different of a programming model where instead of you're initiating everything from the client sets up a connection to your Urbit, and then your Urbit sends it events, which is cool. I was actually looking at Mast last night, and I still haven't fully wrapped my head around server sent events, and I'm struggling to see why I wouldn't just do things in a more browser native way and then implement polling every once in a while to do some swaps. But I think both methods work, and I'm just more comfortable with the HTMX JavaScript library just because I've used it more. So that's what I've been working with, but I'll have to look into it some more.
So, but to be clear, Mast is also a kind of HTMX marriage to Sail. It's just not what you happen to be using in your UIs?
It's not related to HTMX at all, but it is a way to use Sail to do the same thing that I'm using HTMX to do.
I see.
I'm curious what you guys foresee as the role of React or other heavy UI front-end frameworks in a post-shrubbery world.
I hope I never have to see the word React again. I'm so deep down the server rendered rabbit hole that I can't see a future. I mean, you could still do things with JSON and have some separate client, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather just write my interface in Hoon and have some attributes on that HTML that give it some logic, and you don't need to use JavaScript at all.
And will you use Udon to write these interfaces?
I'll use sail, which is embeddable in Udon. Udon and sail are actually interestingly metacircular. Like you can embed Udon in sail, and then you can embed sail in Udon. And they kind of are the same system, and Udon is maximally optimized for writing prose, kind of in the way that Markdown is, where you're thinking in paragraphs. It's like you're writing a blog post. And then Sail is basically a transliteration of HTML. So you have your tags, and you put things inside of your tags. And I mean, Markdown has this concept as well. You can embed HTML in Markdown, but you can't then inside of that HTML in your Markdown start writing Markdown again. So it's a nifty little system. And one of my favorite things about Udon is that when you compile your Udon, your Markdown like blog post into actual HTML code, you can compile it against basically your subject in Hoon. So you can call out to different parts of your system and really easily make dynamic interfaces that reference data on your ship in something that looks like a Markdown file. So it's like you're writing a pretty rich interface with very simple semantics. And in the same way that lots of people know how to use Google Sheets and they just kind of figure it out by using it, it's pretty intuitive. I think the same thing is true with Markdown. Basically, every knowledge worker in the world has some understanding of how Markdown works at this point. And they can figure it out. And then once you know a little bit, it's like this string that you keep pulling on, and you learn a little bit more here and there. And then pretty soon you're writing like really complex documents that have amazing functionality in them.
I'm kind of curious if we could dig into that. What are like some of the examples, maybe even if they're kind of trivial, of like, functionality inside of a document that you might want to be able to do?
Yeah, if you just wanted a dynamic piece of data inside of your document, like say
like
you're
a
running
reference to like something else that's updating because of a service that you have running somewhere else.
Yeah, I see. Maybe you have a Gall agent that tracks, how many page hits a certain website has gotten, and you have some document that, has some paragraph and it says this web page has gotten, and then some template of how many number of pages it is. And inside of that template, you can have Hoon code, which goes out and gets the data from your subject. And every time you refresh the page, the number could be different because it's recompiling that document against the subject that it was, compiled against, which should include this new value. So it's like a templating engine, basically, and it's very ergonomic. People have done some pretty cool things in a Markdown language called MDX. It's like a JavaScript thing. And it's kind of the same concept. You can write React components inside of a Markdown file, and those can, embed these arbitrary JavaScript components that have nice UIs into just something that looks like a Markdown component. So a lot of the React kiddies will have their blogs written in MDX, and they'll have like these super riced out blogs that are like these amalgamations of React components stuck inside of Markdown documents that are mixing prose and code in really interesting ways. And Udon is just that for Hoon. And because it's connected to a personal server, it's actually incredibly powerful.
Right. You have like native access to a bunch of data that's, pretty likely to have whatever it is that you're trying to dynamically interact with in your React development.
Yeah.
So Noxykes Lassell made a point about, why Sail is preferable in a lot of contexts. And I think he actually does a lot of his work in React. But his personal projects, so if you go to Distr Noxykes Lassell, he's got some pretty useful apps, actually, like some of the apps that I find myself using quite a lot. from Urbit, which are like Scratch, which is effectively a paste bin that's self-hosted, and then he's got another one called Silo, which is a direct interface for your S3 bucket. I use both of those pretty frequently, at least once a week. And before talking to Hunter Nuxikes about kind of his preference, I always assumed, because I don't really write UIs, but I always assumed that a reason why people preferred an Urbit native style of rendering was that ergonomically it's kind of just better to only think about one language. In Hoon world, you're kind of in this world of everything is a tree, runes have children, and so being able to stay in that frame of thought is better than having to switch into another environment where all of a sudden your syntax is bounded by semicolons. And it's not that that's not an advantage. I think people do appreciate that. But his point, which I think is probably stronger, is that oftentimes when you're writing an interface in the browser using a foreign environment like React, you have this very frequent two sources of truth style of problem, where synchronizing your state between the client and the server is the most important thing to do, and failures to do that cause all kinds of janky and buggy behavior. And also wrapping around those janky bugs tends to be, often very complex. You have to catch a lot of special cases of where state may be out of sync between the client and the server. And it comes from, this, I think the fact that if you're not treating your server, in this case Urbit, as your single source of truth on not just the data but also the code that renders your interface, it becomes very tempting to think of the client as the proper source of truth for a lot of things. From a performance perspective, you might be leaning into the fact that, okay, the client is going to be using their own CPU resources to render these things, so I prefer to put a lot of work on the client. But then that just complicates the picture a lot more when you remember that, okay, well, all of my persistence is happening on the server, so keeping these two things in sync is going to be a challenge. And I think that actually is the winning story for Sail and for Mast and HTMX, is just that, especially as programs get more complex, you don't want to be syncing your state all the time. You want to know what the source of truth is for both the data and the UI. And yeah, that's and the ergonomics of kind of using Hoon for everything, I think, is something we should lean into. I really disagree with people who are kind of ashamed of Hoon and like how hard it is to learn and everything. I think Hoon is like, the kinds of people who like Hoon are the people we're trying to attract. If people don't like Hoon, there's other projects for them. So yeah, I think that's the winning story. Also, in any case, I don't think it's so much of a matter of opinion about what UI framework people should be using. I think it's really clear that the notion of Urbit for a long time has kind of been that there's this need for a super app type of experience, and that for ideological reasons and also regulatory reasons, a Western WeChat is not quite possible in the way that China was able to do it. It's very difficult for even Elon Musk to put together like a all-encompassing app that's the only thing somebody needs to use. But Urbit is potentially an environment in which disinterested parties who are not necessarily, don't even necessarily know very much about each other can collaborate and mix and match their elements and use the work of other projects to value add on their own end. And it's typically only been true in terms of like functions and libraries, where you can, use other projects as dependencies, code dependencies, but being able to use other data dependencies is really powerful. But the on the ground reality today is that people are not building a lot of components for each other's applications. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that's not true, a lot of reasons. And it's a difficult problem to solve, to be able to say, like, this disinterested third party has built something. I want to build something into that. I want to extend it, even though they didn't build an explicit way for me to extend it. And yeah, at the least, in order to address that problem on the community level, I think there does need to be like some kind of social consensus amongst like maybe 70 to 80% of developers that there's a way to a UI language that people should use, and then with that common language, some of the other problems with being able to mix and match and combine UI elements can be tackled more easily.
Let's give our audience a moment to let those thoughts sink in, and we'll take a short break and be right back.
Short break. Let's do it. Welcome back to Urbit Radio. You're with Master Malwile and migrev-dolseg. I am, of course, Tiller Tolbus.
So you guys have laid out a lot of new terms and ideas. We have Aegean, we have shrubbery, various UI frameworks. How do these all cohere? What exactly is Aegean at this point? What are its various constituent parts?
The way I would conceive of Aegean top level is that, to me, Aegean is just the name of the initiative. Aegean is the fact that, a bunch of us all ended up agreeing that Urbit really needs a kind of browsing experience. And also, as what today feels like a bit of a side note, but that I do think is going to become more essential as we progress, that Urbit should also be treated more explicitly as a social network. That the fact that people are using Urbit to socialize is a big part of the experience and should be made kind of more front and center. In UI terms, what that would mean is that, your friends list is not just any other app. It's like a core part of your navigation experience. You don't put the icon, parallel with, some toy that you downloaded. It's like, it's bookmarked by default or something like that. So Aegean is, to me, a very abstract concept. It's kind of the spiritual alignment, and it kind of represents the philosophical consensus of our team about what it is we'd like to be building. And I would note actually that I was on 0K a while back, and I made the point that that pretty much everything people are really using Urbit for is social networking, and there are other apps that don't do social networking, but they're really not that popular. And I actually think that Will's work is like the biggest challenge to that point of view, and it's a pretty serious challenge. So there are probably going to be social aspects to like this DevX sort of work eventually, especially when you get to collaboration and not even just being able to pull and push code from one party to another, but also the ability to discuss code and review commits. But in a very deep way, Will's work emphasizes a strength of Urbit that is not social. And I've kind of updated my priors on this to where I do believe that like the social aspect of Urbit should not be understated. But there's this other aspect to it that is kind of equally distinguishable, somewhat independent. That is the Urbit is kind of a potentially like superpowered tool for just the developer environment in general. Everything that we were talking about in the last segment, right? So Poldek-Tonteg kind of refers to this as Satya's vision. Essentially, kind of goes down to his belief that the spreadsheet is really the pinnacle of software, especially like the pedestrian-facing no-code type of software development, and that Urbit has a lot of keys to the puzzle of how to make this more encompassing and not localized like the typical uses of Google Sheets. And yeah, I mean, I think that aspect of Urbit should not be ignored. There's Urbit as the programmable interface, and then Urbit as the social network, I think are these two, fairly independent notions of what it is that makes Urbit powerful. And it's some synthesis of the two that I think is going to be the Aegean story. So I just want to mention that. So there's other components to the Aegean projects, and they're more discrete, more concrete. So for example, we have Sky, which is effectively a window manager. It's very influenced by a piece of software that Talon released called Surface, which also lives in the browser and also performs window managing. And both of those projects, Sky and Surface, are influenced by this program called Arc, which is a proper web browser, and something that a lot of people on Urbit use. So Sky is a kind of window manager experience, and it goes into this metaphor where a sky is full of hawks, and hawks are looking at trees. So Hawk is Will's project. It's his proper. Will can talk about it a little more, but my summary of Hawk would be that it's a tree browser. It's meant to be kind of a useful tool for code editing, but also being able to have like a zoomed in and zoomed out kind of navigation experience of more discrete data than the more all-encompassing view that Sky is trying to express. So the two kind of work together in a way where no matter what your the nature of the content is that you're trying to observe, these are the two styles in which you can navigate that content and those UIs. And then Shrubbery is the system component of this, which is there turned out to be a lot of coterminous elements between the desire to build a Scry browser, put the Scry namespace first in the user experience, expose the path to the user, allow them to type in their own paths, and the Shrubbery redesign of the application framework, which really puts paths first in a very native way, to where a lot of the easiest ways, or the obvious ways to build things, kind of automatically includes the ability to expose data to the Scry namespace, and therefore within this kind of Aegean experience or the Sky experience gives you gives the user the ability to browse data in a very generic way. Doesn't matter what the data is, you can still browse it.
Yeah, I come to Urbit from the world of Emacs, and what really drew me into Urbit was the possibility of having an Emacs-like system where I have all of the files that are important to me and all of the operations on those files in a single coherent system that I can understand and control. And where Emacs kind of fell flat for me was that it's always a single player experience. And I was fine with that for the most part, but where it really bugged me was that I couldn't pull it up on my cell phone. I couldn't pull it up on another laptop. Like syncing files between these different devices was just incredibly cumbersome. And I was trying to do all sorts of crazy Git stuff where it would like automatically commit to a repo, and it was just a pain in the ass. So when I learned about Urbit and this idea of a personal server, I immediately made the connection of, oh, I could build Emacs on top of this. And then I have Emacs that's on my phone that docks to the same files as the Emacs that is on my laptop. And it all just lives in this coherent system. And, Hoon ended up being kind of Lisp-like in the way that eLisp is Lisp-like. And they're both made by quirky white guys who are known and have a reputation for being weirdos. And I'm like, okay, this is right up my alley. Like Richard Stallman, Curtis Yarvin, like, yeah, good programmers who have like really weird political beliefs. Like, let's fucking do it. I'm going to learn this system. And I basically I had this idea in the back of my head ever since getting into it that like, yeah, the social aspect of it is really cool, but I mostly want social between my devices, not necessarily between other people. I just want networking capabilities built into the program that stores all of my data. And whether it's talking to other people or not, like it just needs to have some networking capabilities. And I struggled for a long time to like basically turn Clay into the substrate for that. Clay being the file system. But like once I kind of dove deeper into what Shrubbery is and the Neo implementation of Shrubbery that has been progressing quite quickly, all of these pieces started falling into place where it's like, oh wait, you can actually unify this with the interface as well by doing this special trick with Sail and HTMX. And oh wait, you can actually integrate this with an IDE-like environment, so you're editing inside of here and not just viewing your files. And the vision is still the same. Like, I want to be able to access all of my computer from on my phone. And that's the same computer that I'm accessing from all of my devices. And I have complete control over it. And most importantly, I can understand it. It's not some product that's built for me and sold to me. It's a tool that is designed specifically to be controlled by the user of that tool. And I mean, I take a lot of inspiration from Emacs in that design, because it's the ethos of Emacs is that it has to be extensible, it has to be self-documenting, and it has to be fully customizable by the user. And that's totally what I'm trying to build with Sky and Hawk.
So I really feel that when you described IS as a programmable interface, like if there was any programmable interface in the world that would have fit the definition, it would have been Emacs for IS.
Yeah. I mean, outside of Urbit, I think the most impressive computer program that's written for end users is Emacs. Obsidian makes a good run at it, and like there's some actually really impressive like audio editing tools that you can quirk up pretty high as well. But yeah, I mean, it's not for everybody, or it's not for everybody yet. It's like it's still kind of okay, the weird guys who are ricing out their Linux distros and like getting really into it. But But I think it's at least honest in admitting that. And I don't think it's super healthy at the beginning of a project to try and like solve a problem for everybody in the world. I think it's a little bit more honest for me to just be trying to build something that I would use. And hopefully I have good enough taste that, that works out and people actually want to use it.
I think people have, right? There's been a lot of, well, I don't know if I would say a lot of it. I think it's been like a handful of people who were very inspired by the work you did with IS and the demos you released of Hawk, who have, demanded the source code and wanting to work on it. I would actually expect that as of this recording, because you did actually release the source code. Shout out to migrev-dolseg, Will Hep Hanlon on github.com is where the repo lives. I'm absolutely positive at least one or two people have like written their own forks of your software already and are using them to code. No doubt in my mind about that.
Totally. Let's pause there for a second. My headphones just died.
And we're back. Will has fixed his headphones. Welcome back, Will. Test.
Hello.
You sound great. We were talking about your GitHub. I'm sure Little Wolfer is already he's already writing Hoon in his fork of IS or Hawk or something like that. Probably added some key bindings.
Yeah, hopefully key bindings will be a more premier feature of Hawk. And I should probably explain the metaphor there. IS is the word for a baby hawk. And I really wanted a 4-letter word for the prototype, and it just happened that a baby hawk is called IS, which is 4 letters. So it was too good to not call it that. But nobody knows what an IS is. I don't even know what an IS is. But
so in the last segment, I was talking about this guy, Sivril Litzub. I've become a huge fan of this guy overnight. I had not really looked at his work until yesterday. Very sad to hear that you had your own take on HTMX and server-side rendering. But so he's working on this thing called Homunculus, which is amazing. And I don't know why. I guess I know why nobody's talking about it. It's because it hasn't really been publicized. He's just kind of working on it on GitHub. But I found the repo, and so similar to send feeds from Migrev, he's got this 2,500 line Gall agent where everything is intact. Everything is is just all there in the file. And it's, kind of like a first principles, building up in complexity as you scroll down. But it's completely inscrutable because not only is he using the Urbit style of preferring shorter words, typically 4 letters, sometimes even less, but the words that he chose, because, the Urbit style is to choose English language words that are 4 letters. He chose Latin words. So... we could probably put a link to his repo in the show notes. I think it's a work of art.
He's too smart for his own good. No one's gonna read it.
It's written in Hoon and Latin.
the 2 true languages, right? The one the computers know and the only one the humans should know too.
Exactly. I believe the Urbit Classic wrote in its homepage that the Urbit Classic Constitution will be written in Latin rather than Solidity, which is a great move. And yeah, this Homunculus program is a TUI for Urbit. I really can't wait to use it. I'm going to play around with it this weekend. But it's allegedly a program where you can write things like actual Vim for Urbit. You plug into it over an HTTP connection via shell. So you run a script that takes over your terminal and gives you the results of your connection. And the primitives are built to create ncurses style terminal applications for Urbit.
And I think part of the idea is that the UI should be compatible with the browser interfaces as well. So you write your interface as if you were targeting a browser, and then this Homunculus program, if I understand correctly, will turn it into a terminal application. And there's some standardization between how events work, but I can't claim to understand it completely. But it is super cool, and there's a grant for it. If you go to urbit.org/grants/homunculus, you can kind of see an overview of what's happening there. It's super exciting.
Because, in the shrubbery system that we're kind of building out prototypes in the Aegean team for UIs, we have like this really nice notion of components. And we should probably dig into that in somewhat minute detail. We recently also released a demo video of some of the prototypes, and maybe we could put that in the show notes. Actually, Ted reached out to me yesterday and was suggesting that the demo video go on YouTube, and I think that's a good idea. It's raw footage. There's not a lot of production value, but the content is really good. And so I guess briefly, and maybe we'll elaborate later, but in Shrubbery you have distinguishing features between implementations, which are kind of analogous to agents, except that you have a one-to-many relationship where you can define one protocol but then instantiate it in multiple places in your tree. And then you have protocols, which are actually proper protocols. So it's a bit of a confusing nomenclature because an agent is a lot like a protocol in its code form. But in any case, you have protocol files that are put in a folder called pro, and they effectively define types. They are a nominative layer, similar to marks in the Gall and Clay model, that allow you to reference a type with a symbol. And the expectation is that, you, with this nominative layer, you can refer to types that are not necessarily in the user's subject at the beginning. They can resolve using the build system these types, and that is already what is being done to allow for portable data such as pokes to applications. With the protocol system in Shrubbery, you have a much cleaner representation of what it means to have an API. So you're going to define in one of your arms of your Shrubbery implementation all of the protocols that you speak and what kinds of pokes you take. Those are going to have names that you can resolve in the file system, find the hoon that corresponds to them, and they can be, in the case of a simple program, very simple hoon files. It'd be nice to show a code example maybe, but for example, like a mark that goes to, or a protocol that is called hoon, is going to be 4 letters. And it's just going to say hoon. So it's going to pull the type hoon from the subject and surface that to the level of the protocol. And then if you have like a pokes, which is usually a buck sen, and then a tagged union of different types of pokes that a program can receive, normally that lives fairly deep into like a SIR file in the common development patterns in Urbit today. And this pattern kind of isolates that. So if you want to know all of the pokes that an application can receive, it's in one file, and you can just see it inside of a bucksen. What are the head tags and what are the types that it's expecting? It makes it very, very clear how to interact with a thing, even if you know nothing about it beyond that. And then extending this model, there's another analog to marks, which is your conversions. So these currently go into a con directory, which may be renamed because con is actually an illegal directory name in Windows. It's kind of funny. But in the con directory, you have your conversions from one protocol to another. And you can be very flexible with these. You can have one-to-many relationships, so you can go from one type to another using different strategies. And this is the way that we're rendering UIs in our Aegean prototypes, where we have a protocol that maps to HTMX. And then we also, by definition, when we create an agent, we have another protocol representing its state. So if we have a conversion from that agent state into HTMX, then the system will natively use that to resolve the browser's requests and render a component for that agent. And there are some very unique, clever ways. I don't know if we've fully designed the way that this should be done, but there are some ways that you can kind of use these components as components, embed them inside of larger experience, mix and match and combine There's a nice kind of Farcaster story that can be told there where you have, arbitrarily rendered components inside of one unified feed, for example. I think a general pattern that I've seen a lot is that a lot of Urbit developers would prefer to be building components when they build UIs rather than first-class applications. The fact that the kind of landscape, create landscape app framework with React encourages like a first-class experience that takes over its own tab is a bit unfortunate, because a lot of people, like, if you're building a chess app, for example, you may want to embed that chess app inside of another experience. You might want to have like a Talon group that includes some chess games, and you go into the channel in the group that contains the chess games, and that's where the chess game will open from, rather than having to go all the way back to your dashboard and open up a new tab to play chess. So being able to embed smaller experiences within larger ones is like a really powerful feature of this. It's also just a very nice container where, you have a very declarative style of going from state to representation, kind of going into Will's ideas about homo interactivity. You have a very clear notion of what is the relationship between your interface and your data.
Yeah, I know that Talon did the embed a game into your group, and there was that Tharsis game. I didn't play around with it that much. So there is the Gall model of embedding things within things. But the way I see it is that having the native data structure of the, application environment be tree-shaped, it just makes it a little bit easier, because you can just slot your application somewhere in the tree. And you kind of get the embeddability for free as long as the part of the tree that you're embedding your application into allows you to embed there. So you can mix and match and kind of design your computer, the structure of your computer, in a much more flexible way, and in a way that isn't necessarily prescriptive. So one of the coolest part about the conversion system in Shrubbery is that you can find a conversion between two different types if there is a link between different conversion files that will make it happen. So Shrubbery will try to find the shortest route to convert between two types. But if there isn't a direct conversion, but there is a pass-through conversion where I don't have a direct conversion between my type and HTMX, but I have a conversion from my type to a type that does have a conversion to HTMX, the system will find that conversion. So the developers end up having to do significantly less work once a fair number of these conversions have been built up, which is, in my opinion, a 10x increase in development experience, because it changes the way you're thinking about building applications to, instead of I have to build everything from scratch, I just have to build enough types to cover my use cases and then convert between the types that are already being used to my types. And yeah, Mopful Winrux, I was once arguing against Gary actually with Mopful, and Gary might not have even been in the call. I just came to Mopful and I was like, I'm having this disagreement with Gary about, whether the agent should be doing this or doing that or whatever. And the question that he suggested that I ask Gary to force the issue is, what is an application in Shrubbery? And the answer that he was kind of implying there was, an application is just a type and a renderer for that type. And then the user of that application can embed an instance of that type wherever they want in your personal file system or shrub system, whatever you want to call it. And you're not building an entire user experience. You're building a part of a user experience to fit into however the user wants to use your app or your type, basically.
What was the argument we were having?
It was whether the feed agent should be doing gossip or whether the feed agent should be an aggregator of other content that was given to it. And for the record, Mopful was on your side. He was like, I agree with Gary's vision of the future. I caught a lucky break, and Shrubbery ended up being a little bit faster to the table than we thought.
Well, to be clear, I mean, so that was the idea of like the feed agent that we were building, which the code is still out there. I think we should probably do something with it. But whether it should be doing double duty, whether it should be aggregating a feed and gossiping, or just aggregating a feed and let something else do the gossip. And I actually think, in Shrubbery, it doesn't make any sense at all to do that. That's one of the nice things about Shrubbery. It kind of forces you to architect things in a very modular way where, you really, the way the different components of the Shrubbery system are delineated, so far in all of our testing and all of our prototypes, we haven't really found circumstances in which you want one component doing double duty. You can very neatly describe the role of a thing, and then, other things it needs to do come from the relationships of one node to another. So, I mean, I think it probably is correct in Gall if you want to do a feed aggregator that also does gossip. It doesn't make a lot of sense to delineate those responsibilities across different files in your tree. Agents, because of the kind of limited namespace and the fact that when you write an agent at like app faz feed.hoon, you only get one instantiation of that. And so it needs to do more or less everything that it's responsible for, unless it has like some kind of sidecar, helper agent doing something else or running threads or what have you. But it really does kind of encourage this mentality of the monolithic agent, because you're dealing with this scarce resource in the namespace. Thankfully Shrubbery is not like that. It's definitely cleaner to think about it in the way that you were suggesting in the Gall model. In the Shrub model, it makes a lot of sense. You would like to delineate responsibilities at the level of the file tree.
So let's bring in some of the old ideas that we had when we were building out that feed concept, where we originally were conceiving of the Aegean idea as being a social network built around the PALS agent that everybody knows and loves. And Gary, I want to hear your synopsis of the things that you were planning on building on top of PALS and how that vision changes as we move into Shrubbery.
Yeah, there's a lot. I'm not sure what to do with all the old work we did there, because it becomes more and more clear to me every day that we were kind of working around the limitations of the Gall model. And now everybody on the team is just like mind blown, like, wow, Shrubbery is the future. I never want to write another Gall agent. So you released an internal post that was talking about like the idealized Paliverse, and it had some really good points where essentially you want your baseline friends list, potentially with some tags, to be the single source of truth that informs the rest of the user experience. And if you want to layer things on top of that, like maybe you want to add foes, and these are the people that you're blocking. These are all dependent on PALS. So if there's like a dependency tree, PALS is at the root of the tree. And I really liked that idea from a UX perspective, because I was always worried about complicating the user experience in terms of like, okay, well, these are your friends, but these are the people you follow on Twitter, and these are the people who you're sharing your home group with. That kind of flexibility does make sense in some cases. I do think people want the ability to distinguish between who their friends are and who they follow on Twitter, but certainly, like at the base level, especially when you have nothing but a bunch of not very featureful prototypes, it's a bad place to start, where you're like trying to create this like very distinguishing description of your social network. And so you suggested that okay, well, why don't we just use pals and maybe foes to say, here are the people I like, here are the people I don't like. What can I do with that? Turns out you can actually do a lot. And yeah, we had some designs for, some really cool social primitives that you could build out in that model. And we had fairly working agents. We never got around to building UIs for them. And yeah, arguably it shows a bit of a lack of focus that we were kind of nerd sniped by Shrubbery and, some of the ideas there that kind of wrapped neatly around the design problems we were having. Building out Gall agents. But, I have no regrets. I'm full speed ahead with Shrubbery. And, but yeah, there's something there, right? Like, I think, PALS specifically is just this, has just turned out to be an incredibly useful, app for so many different people. And oftentimes when we were like having these like dialectical discussions about like, well, is PALS right? Is there something more we want to add? We were always able to justify PALS as, as something that just kind of works, as, as the basis of the model. So yeah, there's some cool ideas there. I'm kind of bearish on the idea that they'll ever see the light of UIs, but maybe they should. I don't know.
Looking back on it now, I'm more and more impressed with the Palaverse that doesn't even include all of the stuff I was initially trying to shove on top of it. Like, you don't even need foes or tower or, maybe you need some place to stick, rich notifications or like a social media like feed. But I was thinking the other day about, a social network that is built on top of PALS. You kind of don't even need like a block functionality, because if you have something like Twitter that's based on your pals and your pals of your pals, just, 2 hops to your friends and then to their friends. And then you see a post that you really don't like. And you're like, oh, I want to block this guy. Well, either you're pals with that guy and then you can just unpal them, or you know who is the link between you and that person. And that gives you some really interesting information of like, okay, well, this person seems to like this other person's content. Maybe I don't really want to associate with that person. And for the most case, it's probably fine. Like, you can just implement blocking at the app layer if you really need to. But like, I don't know, I think the Urbit crowd right now is pretty resistant to like cancel culture, I guess. And like, people are not going to be like really heavy on the block button, at least in the early stages. And so if I, like, gun to my head, was forced to go the Gall model, what I would want to do is just not over-engineer all of like the censorship mechanisms on top of content delivery, and just focus on a really cool experience around sharing content to your pals and the pals of your pals. And I think there's, that's basically implementable today. If a Hoon developer wanted to make that, you could do gossip-based Twitter pretty easily. And I think someone should, honestly.
You give a very rosy view of the personality profile of the kinds of people who will be joining the network if it actually gains some kind of viral traction.
Right, but you don't have to be pals with those people. Like, that's the beauty of pals. Is you can just say, I don't want to see content from this person. They're not in my network. Great.
You want some kind of opt-out relationship with strangers, people you have no relation to, but they, something from them crosses your UI. It's nice to be able to say, like, I've not initiated an interaction with this person. We may not even have any mutual friends, but but this post was very popular, and so why shouldn't I be able to look at that?
I see what you're saying, but I'm just proposing a different social media, one that is like hyper localized to your pals network, and it's not trying to be a global system. It's not trying to be the town square for all of the world. It's just supposed to be, this is what my pals and the pals of my pals have said. And if something in there shows up that you don't like, well, then you know exactly who you have to deal with to not see that content anymore.
Yeah, it's just like this aesthetic preference in Urbit that I've never really saw eye to eye with. The idea that, like, I want my social network to just be like the people who are close to me. I want to be like, I don't care if it's quiet, it's comfy, I've always felt that, like, there was a need for just, like, more noise, more just, like, chaos. I don't know. Maybe it's not Urbity. Yeah, the Thunderdome. Yeah, I mean, Ryan, we haven't included you in the discussion for a while. I mean, what do you think? What kind of social networking experience do you want, noise level-wise?
I think my personal preference is more on the Thunderdome end of the spectrum, but I think it makes sense to include many. I mean, we have Facebook. Facebook is, kind of like what was just being described, which is a social feed, but restricted to people that you likely have some in-person connection with. And yeah, opposite end of the spectrum, you have Twitter. Yeah, I think we need it all. I mean, our system must be capable of expressing the full range of all human sentiment.
There must be a Thunderdome. I'm not saying you have to use it. It has to be there.
And just as an intuition, it seems like the Thunderdome end of the spectrum is more likely to generate excitement and growth.
I think Thunderdome would actually be a really cool app name. Call it Dome, 4 letters. But yeah, no, it is exciting, right? That's like why that's why so many people like end up moving to big cities, right? Like, okay, yeah, big cities are not that comfy, right? You might get stabbed walking down the street, but in exchange for that, like, the unpredictability of the thing is like, it's very exciting to young people. It's exciting to all kinds of people. So, yeah, I mean, I think obviously it goes without saying, a thing that's truly yours means you get to decide what experience you want with it. But if there's nothing available that is like mass participation, then that's like, it shows a kind of weakness, almost it shows a kind of, it shows a kind of like lack of confidence in the system, if anything, that like, it's only suitable for like small localized cases.
I see it more as an engineering trade-off. Like, I'm not denying the importance of a Thunderdome-like system. I'm just trying to point to the extremely low-hanging fruit of like a cool thing that could be built if you are willing to concede that you're only going to get content from 2 or 3 hops away. And if that is sufficient, you can slowly start to increase the number of hops as the system becomes more capable, and then you have access to more data, and then you can start layering on more of like I don't want to see, content from this part of the network or that contains these words or whatever. But kind of going back to like the honesty in engineering and like being really clear about like the way you actually get from point A to point B, I think it's a little bit like, why are we aiming the gun directly at Twitter and like saying, okay, we're gonna go to this level of program and social network, and like on Urbit, the guy who made the contacts app has this like amazing rant that he goes on, which was like, everyone in Urbit is so big brained. And he walked into the Urbit like ecosystem. He lives in the same town as me, and he was telling me that like when he first showed up, he was so tired of these conversations about like, oh, the perfect system. And he looked around, and Urbit doesn't even have a contacts app yet, and people are like theory selling about like, oh, the perfect social network. He's like, I'm just gonna go make a contacts app, and then we can talk after that. You have to like crawl then walk then run kind of thing.
Okay, but he did that. So we have a contacts app now.
Yeah. And now we're moving on to the next step and then the next step,
I mean, I think, I don't think we are like aiming the gun at Twitter saying that like, this is going to be the place that like Kanye West, wants to use to like promote his new album. or I guess he's not allowed on Twitter anymore, so it'd be like Taylor Swift or something. But yeah, we're not saying that. We're not saying that Urbit is like the platform for celebrities or anything like that. We're just saying that like it's kind of stupid if you're like promoting an app on Urbit and you have to use Twitter, using the Twitter profile named after your Pat P to tell everybody you made an app. Like there should be some discovery, right? There should be some like broadcasting.
What do you guys think about Trill, and how do you use it, and how do you see Trill fitting into like Urbit's adoption curve at this time?
I really like Trill. I think its backend engineering seems to be pretty solid to me. I haven't taken a look at all at the actual code, but it seems to function quite well. If I have any wish for its development, it would be the ability to serve posts using error, so that in the same way that people will share like a TikTok, and you don't necessarily have to have a TikTok account or have it installed on your phone. It's just served to you over the web, and you can watch it. YouTube, all the others. And I think it would be really cool if Trill could serve those posts in the same way, so that I could, I suppose if I posted on Twitter, it might get like downranked or whatever, but at the very least, there'd be a way to deliver that content over Web 2. I think that'd be really cool. But yeah, as it stands today, I think it's pretty impressive.
It's a little slow. I think probably the reason why it's a little slow, and also a reason why I specifically like forked from the Trill design when I was trying to think about doing feeds. I still believe this, like any kind of Shrubbery feed should have this kind of element where the broadcaster no longer needs to do maintenance on their post. They don't have to keep their server up. They don't have to like retrieve likes to their post and like attest to those likes. If somebody wants to pull up a copy of a post, they're not required to have the latest information from the author in order to render it. The post should be rebroadcastable at will. If I post something and then I take my server down, it should continue to float around. And if somebody decides to rebroadcast it in the future, and I've been off of Urbit for a year, that should still be a valid post to rebroadcast. So I believe more in a model of like just aggregating things that like live somewhat independently of their creators. They've been signed, they've been time-stamped. And so, the kind of independent nature of broadcasted content, I think, is going to be pretty important, and I would aim for that model. We talked about this on an Urbit Radio episode, I believe, that the need to replicate the exact functionality of Twitter, where you can see a post's engagements as an aspect of the post itself, but the notion that you're looking at like a single source of truth on that post engagement really just like it implies a centralized model. If you try to do that in a distributed way, you're just distributing the load onto a bunch of people's personal servers. Whereas, I don't think that broadcast should be load bearing. Actually, I think what's needed in a peer-to-peer network is a different model for different expectations, where it feels more like the closest example I could think of, weirdly, is like when people like have those like propaganda, like this habit that was really popular in the old world. I think people are still doing it in like Israel Palestine or something, but like you have like this like piece of propaganda. It's written on a piece of paper. You print out 1,000 copies, and then you go and airdrop it over a community, right? And like that's how you spread your message. Or like I think that's the way like the communists or Bolsheviks in Russia like spread their message, was they had this big printing press, and they just like put those papers everywhere, and they're like, you can't stop us from like leaving these papers everywhere, right? But you can't go back then and be like, wait a second, I need to unprint these and then reprint them, and then and you don't get to like remember like who saw every message. No, you're broadcasting it. You're just letting it fly into the world. And that's what makes it unstoppable, is the fact that you can't even stop it anymore, right? It's out there. So I think the UX of a decentralized broadcast system should be more like that. It should feel more like that, right? You're putting it out there. Nobody can stop it anymore. You've signed it. You've released it. If people want to spread it like wildfire and copy it and put it everywhere, that is their prerogative.
It's reminiscent of rumors, you know? Once you put it out there, the rumor is there. People are gossiping it.
Yeah, you can't edit your rumor. That'd be a funny be a funny troll to Paldev to try to like convince him that people need to be able to edit their rumors. You need to add this functionality. I made a mistake. I didn't mean to post that.
It seems to me that in the UX you describe, that the content that where it would come into play is when people are embedding some piece of, say, some content that you created in their own content, and then they begin to act as an archival node for your content. Because unless it's some, banger post, probably not a lot of people or institutions or CDNs, Urbity CDNs, are going to be interested in hosting a copy of that content. So you would just be the natural archival node. But when you begin to see a weaving of content and a stitching together of content, then you would begin to see more nodes stepping in to duplicate and serve on your behalf.
Well, it could be an automatic feature.
I think the duplication becomes a feature that you get for free when you broadcast your content that depends on somebody else's. So if I want to like quote tweet something that you've posted, I don't have to, send a reference to your post. I send your post itself along with the new post. And you kind of replicate intrinsically.
So then would the UX really be that different from the end user's standpoint?
Well, there's just no notion of editing these things, right? Like the thing has your signature on it. If you signed it, I can quote tweet it. Now, there is like this rabbit hole about the changing of public keys. If I change my public key and then you claim that I posted something from an old public key, that key could have been stolen or I could have signed it. Unless you have like a blockchain that attests to the time at which I signed it, you really don't know past the point of a key change if a message was really mine or not. And so there are systems that are actually blockchain free that kind of wrap mostly around the problem. Of course, it's fairly leaky abstraction, which is why you need proper blockchains for money use cases. But it does get messy in any case. So I think without a doubt, any kind of atomic posts that live independently of the author that can be rebroadcasted at will that are not considered editable, any first iteration of that is going to have a kind of mechanism where, okay, if you change your keys, if you cycle your keys, then all of your posts are now invalid. And working around that is going to be tough. But aside from that case, I really think it is desirable to say that, if you can verify somebody's signature on something, they shouldn't really be able to take that back. They can send a correction out, right? That's what newspapers have to do. If they submit information that they regret, putting out there, then they send another issue and say like, look, I didn't mean to say that, or, hey, I messed up. Here's the new information. That's fine. But any notion of like taking, something that somebody signed and then saying, no, it's not that anymore, it's something else. Like, unless you're communicating very clearly that this is a new revision of the old thing, it's kind of a lie, right? You shouldn't be able to do that, really. Like, it's still true that the original message was signed and sent by the person.
This is one of Urbit's core philosophies is referential transparency. Once you've put a name to something, that thing should not change.
The Scry namespace is written in pen.
Written in stone, written in... Well, there's like tombstoning as well, but yeah. There's a metaphor there somewhere that works. Yeah, you could choose no longer to broadcast something, but you can't choose for me to no longer broadcast your thing. I'm sorry, dude. I got your signature. You know, I like your post.
But you can, and if you do, you will face severe penalties. You'll be flogged.
What do you mean?
By Joe. Well, my understanding is that technically there's no reason one couldn't modify some existing Scry path to change the data that is stored there. It would violate the policy, which is what it is. And I guess we're going to have to figure out some ways to detect and enforce that policy, because at the moment it's just people don't try to or bother to.
In the future, every Urbit by default will be running an agent that listens for double signs. And there will be broad scale trust that the system's official release, or any of the number of official releases, will never double sign natively. And so you must be running forked software in order to double sign. And a very similar mechanism to slashing in proof-of-stake blockchains, if you receive proof that somebody double signed something in their Scry namespace, then you will never trust that Urbit. You will never talk to it. It will strike that Urbit from at least that revision of that Urbit. It will strike that from your knowledge. So from your perspective, you know, once somebody has committed that crime against the referential transparency of the namespace, they will have died.
We've covered a lot of ground today. And there's one more topic that came up during the break, which is regarding a monastery that sounds like Will has spent some time at in the past. I'm not familiar with this story.
Yeah, it was part of my Urbit origin story. I used to be doing front-end development for one of my old college professors when I was living in Denver. And I was roommates with my best friend at the time, and it was during COVID. It was kind of a weird time, and I got really into Emacs, and you know how it goes. You go down some internet rabbit holes, and due to an interesting circumstance, I ended up quitting my job and deciding I was gonna go on a spiritual journey and try to do something in my life that, you know, I wouldn't really have the balls to do, but I was kind of in an interesting situation. I was like, okay, it's COVID, and you know, now's an interesting time. I might as well do something now that is just like totally off the beaten path for someone from, you know, with my background, just to get some more experience. And I was really interested in Buddhism and meditation. I was kind of like a Sam Harris style rationalist at the time, and you know, got really into like life hacking kind of thing. But through the Emacs community, I found out about this monastery called the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth. And it's a really interesting place. They're very focused on existential risk and kind of like the effective altruism community. And I did an apprenticeship there for a few months in the winter between 2021 and 2022. And while I was at that monastery, I, you know, did the whole monastery thing, but I also found out about Urbit because one of the monks who had trained there previously was, I believe, the first employee of Talon, and his name is Joshin. And I've met him a few times since, and he's a really nice guy. And just kind of through the grapevine, I was like, okay, I'll take a look at this Urbit thing. And one thing led to another, and after enough shitposting on Twitter, I ended up with a job at Course One, and now I work on it. So, yeah, that's my path.
Shout out to Joshin.
Shout out to Joshin. I feel like many people's Urbit stories have this kind of like element of, I was in, a weird place personally in my life, and like basically I decided to join a cult. Like, why not? Hey, I'm lacking meaning in my life. Does anybody have like a grand narrative for me to like to adopt?
Yeah. Does anyone have a Kelvin Zero I can strive towards in my dreams?
Yeah. That's definitely, I felt the same way when I was getting into Urbit. I was just like, life, what is there for me to do, really? There's like this necessary part of life. You have to be striving towards something, and it's nice if the thing you're striving towards is more than, in some sense, more than just material. So what is Kelvin versioning? It's trying to, as Tom de Sitrime once said, it's trying to take responsibility for eternity. You're trying to,
it's good.
I mean, that's if you're saying you're Kelvin versioning software in order for it to have some definite lifespan after it freezes, that's one thing, right? Then you've just created a protocol, and you're saying like, I think this protocol will be probably good for, if I'm lucky, 100 years. But if you're trying to be more aggressive than that, if you're saying like, no, these are the Maxwellian equations of software, and it will never stop being useful past the point of freezing, then you are actually making a pretty aggressive statement about the nature of the world that we live in, right? Especially in contrast to like the kind of accelerationist or transhumanist view that like, look, dude, we humans are powerless to understand what the world is going to look like when we have super intelligent machines. You better buckle up. Kelvin versioning is the opposite of that. It's like, no, actually we have access to like eternal truth. You start to sound like a Bible thumper when you when you speak, but that's actually what you need to believe to take the project seriously. So there's definitely an aspect of like, this is the grand narrative that that one should follow. I actually I was thinking recently about Urbit in the context of like, I don't know if you guys have seen you might have seen or read this famous intellectual Slavoj Žižek. I never read any of his work, but I watched one of his documentaries called The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. And he has this take, I think the clip from this went viral on YouTube, but he's talking about the movie They Live, which is an 80s movie where the basic plot is that this guy finds this magic pair of sunglasses, and when he puts the sunglasses on, he could see all of the hidden messaging in society. So he looks at advertisements and he sees like, what is the advertisement actually saying? What's the expectation of society here? And the plot of the movie eventually finds out, spoiler alert, that this is all being done by aliens and they're trying to control people. And it's a very it's a politically minded story, a little bit transparent about what they're trying to say about about Western society, but that wasn't really the point for Žižek. Žižek was trying to say that like he liked the notion of seeing clearly when you put the sunglasses on, because people normally think of life as the opposite, where like when you have nothing obstructing your vision, that is when you see things as they are. And then when you can apply something in order to corrupt or like impose an ideology on top of your view, and that reality is actually the opposite. Human experience is actually the opposite, where like your naked vision of the world is fully informed by some ideology, and it is only upon applying some effort that you can see things from a neutral point of view. And there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. The way I interpret that is that like, you actually like do need some kind of ideology or religion or like guiding principle in order to just like perceive. Your notion of being able to learn something or interoperate with the world needs to have some kind of teleological element. And so yeah, it's great that we have this Urbit cult that allows us to to color in our vision.
I struggle with trying not to be too dogmatic about Kelvin versions and everything, because it is kind of an easy thing to dunk on. Like, who do you think you are? 25-year-old, you're gonna really solve all of computing? Like, come on, man. But luckily, I've been able to basically ignore all of that and just, Urbit was good enough to solve the problems that I'm trying to solve, and the problems that I'm personally trying to solve are luckily a lot more scoped than freeze all of computing. And I like the vibes of freeze all of the computing, but I try not to make strong claims about like whether or not that's actually possible. But I hope it is.
Even without making strong claims about whether or not that's possible, even without taking like a stand on the issue of like how will the nature of the world change, when there are super intelligent machines, I think like fundamentally what makes Urbit so divisive, where you have like people who are really into Urbit and people who really hate it and can't even explain why, is the audacity of the thing, right? And even beyond the Kelvin versioning kind of story, which, yeah, I mean, it is kind of saying a lot, right? There are, I wouldn't say metaphysical, but there are like deeply philosophical implications to the idea of Kelvin versioning, the notion of it. And you must have, something resembling a kind of essential view of the world, a notion that you have access to some like unchanging elements about base reality in order to take seriously those notions. But even beyond that, just the amount of work that has been done, the amount of new words that have been created, new symbols, just to make Urbit possible, that alone is offensively audacious to many people, and also and impressively audacious to others, right? So like anybody investigating Urbit, for more than a cursory amount of time is going to be struck by that level of audacity, and how they intuitively react to that is going to tell you, whether they're going to be a hater or a lover. Alrighty, guys, let's wrap it up. We've been recording for 2 hours now. Hopefully there's a decent amount of content in here. Any final takeaways from this discussion?
It was great to talk to you guys. Yeah, good conversation.
Everyone should check out the Neo group and keep apprised of Shrubbery.
Absolutely. Alrighty, guys. I will see you next time on Urbit Radio. Sponsored by Red Horizon.
Migrev out.